Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens when our last breath is taken? When the heart stops beating and the body stops responding, what actually follows this transition? Questions about death, as inevitable as life itself, are the oldest and perhaps the most intriguing of all human questions. No matter the culture, religion, or place you are, death is something that generates mystery, fear, and even fascination. But why does this transition from the world of the living to the world of the dead strike so much fear in our hearts? What actually happens when the soul leaves the body? Imagine for a moment your last breath. What happens right now? Where does the soul go? Does she know she left? Could it be that somehow she still observes the world of the living as if she were just in a nightmare, waiting to wake up? These are powerful questions that connect us to the fragility of our existence, but also to the search for answers that transcend this physical reality. And what about the souls of babies who die at birth? Is there some kind of place they go? A space where the purity of their souls is protected? What about those who leave without ever seeing the light of day? What happens to them? Is death the end? Or is it just a bridge to something bigger, something we can't even imagine? The answer to these questions, although they seem profound and for some frightening, have a common thread: the search for truth. The search for answers that make us understand not just death, but life. The idea that perhaps the purpose of life is greater than we imagine, and by trying to understand death we can, in some way, better understand our own existence. When we look at death, perhaps we are looking at life in a fuller way. What do we know about what comes next? What really is the other side? Is it more of a spiritual reality than we imagine? Is there something beyond the limitations of our human perception, beyond the walls of this physical life? Could it be that deep down, what awaits us is something much grander, something that we transcend when leaving this body? There are reports of people who, after near-death experiences, returned with stories and visions of what happens after that moment. Stories of beings who came close to death and came back to tell what they saw and what they felt. Something that many call the other side, but which for many is still a great mystery. People talk about bright lights, an indescribable sense of peace, and a love that cannot be described in words. But what is this? Where are we going when we leave this world? Do those who left still know about us, those who stayed? Can they see us? These stories, these questions, are not just philosophical or spiritual questions. They touch the depths of our emotions. They make us reflect on the meaning of our existence. And perhaps if we are honest with ourselves, we will realize that, in fact, we are all afraid of death. But perhaps it is the fear of the unknown that scares us more than the act of dying itself. But what if the unknown is not something to be feared? What if, instead of being an end, death is just a new beginning? What really is life, if not a cycle? A continuous journey of learning, growth, and evolution? Wouldn't death then be just a transition to a higher phase of this journey? Where do we go when we leave? Is there something more, a new reality, something that transcends our earthly understanding? Let's imagine for a moment. The soul, upon leaving the body, finds itself in a place where time does not exist as we know it. Maybe there are no more hours, minutes, or seconds. Instead, what would exist would be a feeling of eternity, where each moment unfolds into something deeper, more complex, more beautiful than we can understand. The soul, free from physical limitations, could finally understand what, while incarnated, it could never have seen. The vision of true reality, of what really matters, of who we are in essence. What if you could for a moment look into the beyond? Imagine going beyond the limits of physical existence and touching infinity. Your soul, as it frees itself from the body, could be preparing itself for a new experience, one that is still beyond our ability to understand. But how do you know? How can we understand this without having a true experience, without being on the other side of life? Now imagine that there is a great truth waiting for those who dare to ask, who dare to explore the depths of the unknown. Wouldn't death, then, be the great key to the final truth? Isn't our search for answers the true spiritual journey, which begins the moment we accept that death is not the end, but just a chapter in a bigger story? However, there are those who fear the end of everything we know, the loss, the pain, the mourning. These emotions are difficult to bear, but perhaps they are just a reflection of an attachment to what is temporary, what is fleeting. What if, instead of fearing death, we learn to accept that it is part of the cycle of life? That by living with more awareness, with more gratitude, we could perhaps live more fully? Death does not have to be an enemy. She is just a passage, a portal to what comes next. And it is exactly there, on that threshold, that the real question lies. Not what happens next, but how we live while we are here. Shouldn't we live more intensely, more presently, more truthfully, knowing that every moment is precious and that death, far from being something to be feared, is just a reminder that life is a gift? So what do you think? Are you ready to start looking at death not as the end, but as a fundamental part of the great journey that is life? Perhaps by doing so, we can begin to live more fully, embracing the uncertainties, the mysteries, and most of all, the love that surrounds us. What do you think happens when we leave? Could it be that the answer lies in living well, in living with love, and perhaps, in the end, being welcomed by something much greater than we imagine? Now, imagine that you are lying down, calm, waiting for whatever comes next. But as time passes, you begin to realize something you can't understand, something beyond the physical. You feel the separation, as if somehow your soul is about to break free, to transcend the flesh. In a matter of seconds, the fear you previously felt begins to subside, because perhaps you have already accepted the idea that death is not the end, but rather a door to something much greater. So what happens when we walk through that door? Where do we go when physical life ends? Have you ever stopped to think that perhaps death is a release, a transition to a plane where everything makes sense, where the answers to life's big questions finally become clear? But before we move on to what comes next, it is important to understand what happens at this threshold. What happens at the exact moment the soul leaves the body? People who have had near-death experiences, or who have entered deep states of meditation, report seeing a light, a sense of peace, and a deep connection to something greater. And even after returning to the physical body, these people never look at life in the same way again. They return with the certainty that death is just a continuation. For many, death is like a great leap, a process of liberation that goes beyond our understanding. The witnesses who return to tell their stories speak of a sense of belonging, of being in a place where everything is clearer, more vibrant, more true. A place where love and peace are not just concepts, but a tangible reality. And here comes the question that no one can answer completely. What comes next? But what if, in fact, what exists after death is not a distant and mystical reality, but something that, in some way, already touches us while we are alive? Something that surrounds us every day, but that we cannot perceive because we are blind to what is invisible? If, in fact, what happens after death is just a continuation of what we are already experiencing now, but in a purer, truer form, have you ever imagined what it would be like for your soul to free itself from the prison of the body? The feeling of being free, of transcending pain and physical limitations. Suddenly, you could perceive life in a completely new way, where time doesn't exist as we know it, where every moment is eternal. You would begin to see everything that has always been around you in a more intense, truer way. Perhaps what many call the afterlife is just the true life, which we are never fully aware of while we are trapped in our physical bodies. But at the same time, this leads us to a deep question. Are we really living fully? Or are we just waiting for death, as if it were the great mystery, the great revelation? What if true revelation lies in the way we live, the way we connect with the unseen, the way we touch the spirits of others and allow our own spirit to be touched? To explore this idea, let's turn to those who have experienced death, or at least had a near-death experience. The accounts of these people often speak of a feeling of unity, a perception that everything is interconnected, that each being, each soul, is part of a great universal plan. What follows this transition is a reunion with pure love, with the truth of our being. But then, where does the soul go after it leaves the body? In many accounts of near-death experiences, people claim that they continue to perceive the physical world, but in a different way. They are no longer tied to gravity, time, or pain. They see themselves floating, as if they were part of the environment around them. And that is where one of the greatest mysteries lies. Does the soul, when leaving the body, have the ability to observe everything that happens in the physical world? Does she realize the people they left behind? Or does it happen that, at the moment of departure, the soul dissolves into something greater, something indescribable, something beyond our ability to understand? There are those who say that the soul continues its journey on a higher plane, where time and space do not exist in the same way as we know them. On this plane, perhaps all the questions we have throughout life will be answered. Perhaps when we walk through this door, we will have a clear vision of what we have always sought, but which we could never fully understand while we were immersed in our material existence. So what happens to the departed souls? According to the experiences of people who returned, souls are not lost, they do not disappear. They continue to exist on another plane, but they remain connected to the world of the living, to us in a subtle, invisible, but present way. Perhaps what we perceive as souls that never rest is actually the ongoing connection between those who left and those who remained. And who knows, perhaps it is our own soul that, after death, becomes part of this great flow of energy and love, connecting with the souls of those who have also departed. Now stop for a moment and reflect. Do you think death is really the end of everything? Or is it just the transition to a higher plane, where our true essence, free from the flesh, can finally understand the purpose of life, the purpose of our existence? Perhaps the key to understanding what happens after death is actually understanding what we do while we are alive. The way we live, the way we relate to the world around us, to others and to the invisible, can be what defines what will happen to our soul after we are gone. And if all this is true, shouldn't the life we lead today be more conscious, more present, more fulfilling? Perhaps true understanding of life after death begins not with a look into the future, but with a deep analysis of the present. How are you living now? How are you touching the spirits of others? How are you connecting with the invisible? Meanwhile, the big question continues to echo. What happens next? Will we one day have the answers? Or is it that, in the end, the answers are not as important as the journey we are on now? Now imagine yourself traveling through an endless corridor where light and shadow mix in a spectacle of colors that you have never seen before. You don't feel the weight of your body, as if you have become part of the air itself. The silence is profound, but at the same time, there is a feeling of harmony, as if everything around you is a soft music, a cosmic melody that you cannot identify but that you feel in your being. The peace is indescribable, and the fear, so present when you were alive, begins to dissipate, because you realize that, somewhere, everything makes sense. This is the state described by those who have had near-death experiences and returned with reports of a reality beyond death. Many speak of an intense light that calls to them, a light that is not just physical, but that seems to be the very essence of universal love. A love that transcends any human understanding, that involves and welcomes as if, when crossing this portal, you were finally home. But then the big question arises again. What really is this light? And where does it take us? For some, this light represents a space of purification, of healing, where the soul prepares to advance to a new plane of existence. But what if, in fact, light is just a metaphor for understanding what lies beyond death, a representation of an expanded consciousness, where there is no longer separation, just a unity with the whole? And if you were there, on the edge of that path, with the certainty that you are about to cross that invisible border, what would go through your mind? Some people report that at this moment, they have a life review, as if all experiences, good and bad, were mixed into a single vision. Every action, every word, every thought you had during your life becomes clear, as if it were being absorbed by you, as if it were part of something much larger, something that you were unable to see while you were in the flesh. The feeling of living each moment again, but this time with a full understanding of its impact, is an experience that many describe as overwhelming but also deeply transformative. And in this process, doubts begin to dissipate. What once seemed confusing and incomprehensible now reveals itself as part of a greater whole, a divine tapestry that weaves life and death into an eternal dance. But what about the souls that remain? What happens to those who do not immediately cross this threshold, who remain in a state of transition, as if they were waiting for something more? Are these souls lost, or are they simply in a state of preparation, awaiting a new opportunity, a new understanding? Some believe that the souls that remain are those who are not yet ready to fully understand what has happened to them, who do not yet have the ability to detach themselves from the world of the living. These souls, for the most part, are described as lost spirits, or wandering souls, wandering aimlessly in search of answers, in search of light, but without knowing exactly where to go. These souls can be seen by those who have a more sensitive perception of reality, in moments of deep meditation or in dreams. They may appear to be in a state of confusion, as if they have not yet realized you are gone. It's as if they are in a kind of limbo, waiting for the right moment to move on to what comes next. But what if wandering souls are not actually lost? What if instead they are in a learning process, awaiting a deeper understanding of what it means to exist, what it means to live and die? What if limbo is, in fact, a place of preparation, where souls review their lives, reflect on their choices, and prepare to move forward into a new cycle of existence? There are also those who believe that the soul, after death, can connect with the souls of departed loved ones, forming a spiritual support network, a community beyond death. This network, according to some beliefs, is not just a place of rest or healing, but a space where souls can learn, grow, and connect with the divine. In this space, souls can have access to superior truths, visions of the great mystery of life and death, finally understanding the role they played in the great universal plan. But what does this mean for those who stayed? For us, the living, who still wonder what comes next? If the soul does not disappear but continues its journey, how can we connect with it? Could it be that, in some way, the souls of those who left still accompany us, still observe our lives, trying to guide us, protect us, show us the way? There are reports of people who have felt the presence of deceased loved ones, how they still appear in times of need, how their energy seems to hang in the air, as if they were trying to communicate in some way. These experiences can be disconcerting, but they also offer a glimpse into the idea that death is not the end, but rather a transition, a change in the way of existing. The soul continues to live, but in a different reality, a reality that we can begin to understand, but which at the same time is beyond what we can perceive with our physical senses. In many of these accounts, the presence of deceased loved ones is felt through signs such as a gentle breeze, a feeling of warmth, or even fleeting visions. These experiences are often accompanied by a feeling of comfort, of security, as if the love that existed between people had not been interrupted by death. Perhaps what this teaches us is that the connection between souls is not limited by physical separation. Love transcends death, and the soul continues to connect with those it loves even after they are gone. The big question that arises from these experiences and reports is, what does death mean then? Are we dealing with something that is truly the end? Or are we just seeing death through the limited lens of our human perception? And if it's just a transition, what happens next? The soul's journey does not end here, but somewhere else, where the answers are finally revealed, where the light that shines beyond death becomes clear, where the purpose of everything we live and experience becomes evident. Now, imagine what would happen if, upon leaving this world, we could finally understand the true meaning of life, death, and eternity. Perhaps the answer to these big questions lies not in fearing death, but in living fully, consciously, with love and gratitude, knowing that our journey continues, no matter where life takes us.